Widowed and starving, she was left to die until a human gave her his last meal. Tessari. 9 wasn't on any travel brochure. The mining colony had been stripped of value a decade ago. Now it functioned as a salvage sprawl and quarantine dump for refugees and rejects. The atmosphere was barely breathable outside the shielded domes, and inside, life was a slow crawl through heat, grit, and hunger. The system authorities didn't care what happened here, as long as it didn't spread. Steve Hartlawn knew the kind of place it was. He just didn't expect to get stuck on it. He was a systems engineer, 36, former military contractor, now freelance tech for the Outer Run supply fleets. He wasn't supposed to be grounded more than a few hours. His skiff, the Kestrel B, had flagged a coolant breach and air seal fault when passing low orbit. Protocol demanded an emergency landing. So here he was, crouched under one of the outer dome connectors, running diagnostics with the filtered sun glaring overhead and the whole place stinking of rusted freon, hot dust, and exhaustion. He hadn't slept. The bunk on his skiff was sealed off during pressure rerouting. He'd dozed maybe 20 minutes in the cab's jump seat. His nerves were frayed, and the only edible item left was a heat bar in his chest pocket. He meant to ration it. Then he saw her. At first, she looked like a shadow in the scrap, curled beside a half-crushed depot bin, beneath a fractured piece of Durasteel. Most locals didn't sleep this close to the drone patrols. She had to be desperate or hiding. He hesitated. She was tall. Even crouched, she looked too big to vanish in the wreckage. Her skin was a strange, deep violet blue, mottled with dust and sweat. Long white hair hung down in uneven strands, tangled and wind-dried, some of it caught in a seam of rusted metal. Her face was angled away. She didn't move, but he saw her shoulders rise and fall, slow, uneven, still breathing. Then he noticed the child. Small, frail, pressed into the woman's chest like a limb she was trying to keep warm. Couldn't be more than 4. The child's skin tone matched hers, though it looked lighter in the light. Less sun-exposed, maybe. The child's arms were limp, wrapped tight under a torn piece of shimmer fabric. Too still. Steve stepped closer. He could leave. This wasn't his business. People died here all the time. Some chose it, but he didn't walk away. His boots scraped over cracked floor plating. He knelt, not too close. The woman stirred. Her eyes opened, pale silver, slanted at the corners. She didn't flinch, just looked at him, expression locked in a strange mixture of alertness and fatigue. Her arms didn't loosen around the child. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. No answer. He reached slowly into his jacket, pulled out the heat bar, held it out in his hand. It was warm from his chest, slightly bent from pressure. She didn't grab it. Her eyes flicked to his hand, then to his face. "You're human," she said. He nodded. "Why?" He wasn't sure what she meant. "Why? Why are you giving that to me?" Her voice was low, clear but uncertain. She sounded dry, parched. Every word took effort, but not weakness. There was tension in her neck, her jaw. She wasn't begging. She was warning him. Steve looked at the child again. Her lips were cracked. A tiny flicker of breath fogged out, then vanished. He extended his hand further. "Because your kid needs it." The woman's fingers moved. She took the bar carefully, like it might dissolve. Then she cracked the wrapper and snapped it in half. Without a word, she placed the bigger piece against the child's lips. The child woke sluggishly. Her small mouth opened. She ate without speaking. Steve stayed crouched. After a minute, the woman spoke again. "You shouldn't be seen with us." He looked around. No patrols. No drones. Just heat shimmer and distant clangs of machines barely working. "Noted," he said. "My name is Linari," she added. "We were dropped off 5 days ago." Steve looked at her again, this time more carefully. "Dropped off." Her voice sharpened. "After my mate was killed, my caste refused to keep us. His status died with him. They sent us here. Claimed we weren't economically viable." Steve felt his stomach turn. "That legal where you're from?" She didn't answer. Her hand slid protectively over her child's head. "I'm Steve," he said quietly. "Just an engineer. Got grounded yesterday." She nodded. A long, slow blink. You should get off-world before they see you helping castless. He almost smiled at the term. You saying that as a warning or a threat? This time, her lips twitched. Not quite a smile, just muscle memory. She looked away. Steve stood. You need water? She didn't respond. But when he walked off, he heard the child whisper something in a language he didn't understand. And for a brief second, he felt something heavy settle in his chest. The next morning, he came back with his water thermos. He found her huddled in the shade of a loader wreck, trying to wrap the shimmer cloak around the child. Her own legs were bare to the upper thigh. Her shoulders were exposed where the wrap had torn. Her skin had split in places, hairline cracks along her collarbone. Dried blood. She wasn't wearing shoes. He crouched again and offered the thermos without a word. This time, she took it faster, drank in slow, measured sips, then handed it to the child, who drank noisily, eyes wide. Steve watched quietly. You were right, he said. They don't like cross-species interaction. Linari set the thermos down. 3 workers stare me down on the way here, he added. One muttered breeder trash. That mean anything to you? She exhaled through her nose. I was from a Varellan fertility caste. My body was designed to be attractive, reproductive. After my mate died, I was considered defunct. A liability. He stared at her for a long moment. Jesus. She looked up, eyes hard. Don't pity me, human. Just understand where this ends. There was silence. Then softer, she said, the ration bar. You didn't have to give that away. You could have reported us for food theft. Steve shook his head. I'm not from a place that does that. She looked at him differently then. Not with trust, but with less suspicion. That night, he moved an old thermal coil into the shadow of his service bay, built a crude shelter using parts of unused conduit foam, storage blankets, and half a power cell for mild heat. He didn't ask if she would use it. He just found her there the next evening, huddled with the child. She was wearing his old jacket over the shimmer wrap. It dwarfed her shoulders but gave her back some coverage. Her white hair was cleaner, damp from scavenged steam, maybe. Steve stood nearby, checking the duct seals on the skiff. I'll be flying out in 3 days, he said, without turning. Assuming the stabilizer runs clean. No answer. I can take you somewhere better. Somewhere with aid. Or maybe just not here. Still silence. Then she asked, barely audible, why? He glanced back. You don't know me. You don't know me. He walked closer, looked her in the eye. I didn't plan to care, he said. But I do. Linari's gaze held his. Her hand tightened around the child's side. I'm not beautiful anymore, she said. But I could still warm your bed, if that's what you need. Steve's jaw tensed. He crouched, looked at her without blinking. No, that's not what this is. She blinked once, and something behind her eyes softened. You're not a burden, he added. You're the reason I stayed. The child stirred, coughed once, then opened her eyes. Will the nice man come back tomorrow? She asked sleepily. Steve smiled, just a flicker. Yeah, kid. I'll be here. And in that quiet, broken moment, amid ash heat and recycled air, something real began to form. The air felt different the next morning. Not cooler, Tessari. 9 didn't have cool mornings. But sharper, like the heat carried something under it. Something watching. Steve didn't like it. He'd slept in the skiff, finally got the stabilizer to stop throwing errors. A good sign. If he wanted to leave, he could. But he hadn't packed. He hadn't run the full pre-flight. He hadn't even activated the departure ping. He knew why. She was still here. When he stepped out of the skiff's belly ramp, the rusted metal creaked. The dust was already sticking to his boots. He slung a canister over his shoulder, water, protein paste, a wrap cloth with a few warmers he'd repurposed from his cabin's emergency stock. He walked the same route around the depot fence, careful not to be seen. He kept his head low. When he reached the shelter, they weren't inside. The blankets were disturbed, the heater coils still warm, but the space was empty. His stomach tightened. He scanned the yard, then stepped into the corridor between scrap haulers. After 30 seconds, he spotted them, tucked into a crawl recess beneath a rusted chassis. Linari had the girl under her arm, her back to the wall, her eyes locked on the open path beyond. When she saw him, she didn't relax. You moved, he said quietly. She nodded once. Someone was here last night. They stood outside the shelter. Didn't speak. Just watched. Then left. Steve exhaled. Security? No. The boots weren't standard. Too light. More like a scavenger. But they knew we were in there. He knelt beside the opening, set the canister down, and passed it inside. Linari looked at him longer this time. Her expression was unreadable. Then she took it. You still want to leave in 3 days? She asked. He shook his head. Timeline shifted. I'm not lifting off until I know you're safe. She studied his face. You're going to get yourself flagged. He shrugged. They'll have to catch me first. The child shifted in her sleep. Linari adjusted the jacket around her, then murmured, Her name is Sarai. Steve nodded. She's strong. She hasn't eaten properly in days. What you brought kept her lucid. There was silence. Then Linari spoke again, slower. You asked no questions yesterday. Not about why I was cast out. Not about what I did before. Why? Steve's jaw worked once. Because none of that should matter. To you, she said, watching him. But to my kind, it's everything. He looked at her then, really looked. Not just her height, not her skin or body, but her tension. The way her hand hovered over Sarai like a shield. The quiet calculation behind her silver eyes. She had been someone once. Someone trained to carry status, expectation, responsibility. And now she was living in a junkyard, wrapping her daughter in strangers' clothes, hiding like a fugitive. I figured if you wanted to tell me, he said, you would. She gave the faintest nod. I was a bond wife. My mate was military grade, rank caste. I was selected based on body viability, gene viability, and fertility pattern. I bore him a daughter. But when his ship went silent during a perimeter conflict, they labeled him terminated without lineage priority. My value went with him. Steve clenched his fist. They discarded you. They processed me, reassigned my dwelling, rescinded caste rights, said I would be eligible for non-reproductive labor rotation. Then they saw I had a child and decided not to waste the rations. So they put us on a logistics dump vessel headed for Tessari 9. Steve looked away. His throat was tight. I never loved him, Linari added after a pause. But I respected the system. I did what was asked. I didn't know how much of myself I'd given up until they told me I wasn't worth the air I breathed. Steve stood. You're worth more than this whole colony. Her mouth twitched, like the words cut deeper than he realized. Footsteps interrupted them. Steve spun, hand instinctively going to the multi-tool clipped to his belt. A shadow passed at the edge of the scrap pile. Too quick to get a good look, but not too quick to miss the fact that they were being watched again. We need to move, he said. I know a maintenance duct that leads under Bay 12. It's dry and power dead. I can reroute airflow, mask your thermal. Linari hesitated. What about your ship? He looked her in the eye. I'll abandon it if I have to. She didn't argue. By dusk, they were inside the duct. Steve had looped heat coils against the metal wall and distributed airflow using a cracked intake fan. The warmth inside wasn't much, but it kept Sarai from shivering. She sat in Linari's lap, chewing slowly on a protein cracker. Steve watched them both from the corner. He didn't sit too close. He didn't touch. But every so often, Linari's gaze would drift to him. You're not military, she said. No, but you know how to move like one. He didn't answer at first. Then, I used to work logistics for fleet security, power relays, breach bypass systems. I saw what happened to people who didn't follow protocol. I learned to stay quiet, but I remembered every face I couldn't help. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That's why you stayed. Steve nodded once. This time I could do something. A long pause settled between them. Then she leaned forward slightly. Steve, yeah, if you keep protecting us, you'll be marked as complicit. That comes with a penalty. He looked at her. Then we run together. She exhaled slowly. You don't know what we're running from. You didn't ask what I'm running from either. Her eyes widened slightly at that. For the first time, she didn't have a response. Behind her, Sarai let out a small yawn. Her eyelids fluttered. Mama, she mumbled, eyes half closed. Don't let the lights take me. Linari shushed her softly, wrapping her tighter. Steve watched the scene, Watched the way the woman who had offered her body in shame now radiated something else entirely. Not seduction, not defense, just quiet determination. She caught him looking, held his gaze. "You'll stay with us tonight?" she asked. "Yes," Steve said. "I'll keep watch." She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Later, when Sarai was asleep and the duct was dim and quiet, Linari moved closer, her shoulder brushing his arm. "I'm still afraid," she said softly. "Even now." "I know." She looked at him for a long time. Then, quietly, she added, "But I don't want to sleep alone anymore." Steve didn't move, didn't speak, but he shifted slightly, enough for her to lean against him, enough for her hand to rest over his. They didn't kiss. They didn't undress. But in the cold air beneath the junkyard, warmth began to return to them, not through body heat, but through choice. Tomorrow, someone might come looking again. But tonight, no one was alone. The silence inside the duct didn't last. Somewhere above them, metal rang. Not the usual groan of expansion or wind pressure. This was deliberate, measured. A boot fall. Steve's eyes snapped open. He was sitting against the duct wall. Linari leaned against his side. Sarai curled between them under his jacket. It was still dark, maybe 2 hours before first light. The filters on his watch blinked red. Motion proximity, 12 meters. He nudged Linari gently. Her eyes opened instantly. No confusion, just clarity, awareness. She'd been a soldier's wife, trained, prepared. She didn't speak. She reached for Sarai and held her close. Steve moved silently toward the duct's edge, pressed his ear to the wall. Another step, then a pause. The pacing wasn't random. Someone was tracking heat signatures or movement, not just patrolling. He whispered they found the shelter. Linari's brow furrowed. "The one behind your bay?" "Yeah. Someone must have checked the thermal logs. I didn't mask them well enough." She swallowed. "Then they're looking for more than just squatters." He nodded. "They know I help." A sharp thud echoed, close. Something heavy had been dropped. A second later, faint static crackled overhead. Unit 7. No sign of them at Bay 12. Thermal shows disturbance in Sector 3D, corridor vent line. Routing 2 from admin outpost. Steve pulled back. "They've triangulated us." Linari's voice was steady. "How long until they breach?" "If they got thermal lock, maybe 6 minutes." She didn't hesitate. "We have to split." Steve frowned. "No." She turned to him. "They'll scan for group movement. If they catch all of us together, they'll tag us instantly. If you leave now and draw them off." "I'm not leaving you." She stared at him, eyes hard. "You will if Sarai is going to survive." Sarai stirred against her shoulder, murmuring something incoherent. Steve bit down hard. He ran the math in his head. 2 runners had better odds if they weren't carrying a child. He had a tool set, maybe a flash flare, some wiring, enough to throw a false signal trail. "Okay," he said, already moving. "You stay in the west duct. Keep crawling until you reach the coolant spill at Bay 17. It's abandoned. No scanners there." She nodded. "And you?" "I'm going to make them think I'm smuggling contraband through the exhaust stack." Linari pressed Sarai against him. "Just don't get killed." He smiled tightly. "Same to you." She paused. Then, quick and silent, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his jaw. No heat, no performance, just contact, real and raw. They parted. Steve ducked low, crawling fast through the side panel hatch. His boots echoed slightly as he moved, so he slipped out of them halfway down, working in socks for silence. Every corner he turned, every breath he took, he was calculating. If they caught him, maybe they'd think he acted alone. But he knew better. This wasn't just about aid violation. Someone wanted her gone. And not just deported, erased. He reached the base of the exhaust tunnel, found the loose panel he'd used earlier, and wedged the flare inside. He rewired the capacitor from an old heater pack, primed it for a heat pulse. When it fired, it would mimic a group of bodies moving fast through the vent. Enough to send the patrol scrambling. The flare lit. Above, alarms chirped. Movement burst across the top deck. He could hear boots slamming metal. Orders shouted through comms. Steve ran the opposite way, ducking through a half-flooded access tube and dropping down into an old fuel storage bay. He stopped behind a stack of canisters, breathing hard. Every inhale stung, sweat mixed with fuel vapor. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. Then he waited. 10 minutes passed. No footsteps, just silence. He moved again, quietly, exiting through a collapsed scaffolding. He made his way to Base 17, where he hoped they were. He found Linari and Sarai tucked between two rusted engine cradles. The child was asleep again, curled in her mother's lap. Linari's hair was damp with sweat. Her eyes were open, watching for him. When she saw him, she didn't say anything, just let out a long, quiet breath. He crouched beside her. They took the bait. She nodded. For now. Then she reached over and gripped his hand. I thought you wouldn't come back. He swallowed, voice low. I told you. I'm not leaving. She held on to him. Harder this time. They stayed like that for several minutes. Silent. Just breathing. The fear hadn't passed, but for now, they were alive. Later, when Sarai stirred again, Steve handed her a half-empty water pouch. She drank, blinking up at him. Are we going to the sky now? She asked. Steve looked at Linari, then back at the girl. Soon, he said. But first, we have to find a safe way to get there. She nodded seriously and curled up again. That night, Linari spoke softly in the dark. You should know something. Steve turned. There are people looking for me. Not just enforcers. Not just patrols. He narrowed his eyes. What kind of people? My mate wasn't just military caste. He was part of a reproductive legacy chain. I wasn't supposed to bond. I was assigned. When he died, his bloodline investors lost access to my viability. They consider Sarai stolen property. Steve went still. They want her, she said flatly. They don't care if I survive. Only that they retrieve the investment. He leaned forward. Why didn't you tell me before? I didn't know if you'd stay. He didn't hesitate. I'm still staying. Linari looked at him, and this time, no doubt lingered in her expression. Only something else. Something steadier. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just about survival now. It was about escape. The next morning came without warning. No sunrise marked the shift, just a slow fade from dark rust orange to a dusty gray under the dome's stained canopy. Steve adjusted the coil wrap around his shoulders and crouched near the edge of the old bay, eyes scanning for drone movement. Nothing passed. Behind him, Linari was gathering what little they had, his jacket now torn at the hem, the food pouch reduced to a thin scrap tied to her hip. Sarai clung to her side, one hand curled tightly in the fabric of her mother's leg wrap. She hadn't spoken since waking. Steve leaned in. You still know the corridors under Sector 9? Linari nodded. The tunnels connect through service gullets near the old fabrication line. He pulled out a piece of cracked polyglass and showed a hand-drawn map. We'll go through these maintenance routes, bypass the upper security hallways. I have an uplink module stashed at a dead console hub near Dock 14. If it still works, I can patch a signal off-world. Linari stared at the sketch. That's 3 kilometers through patrol territory. I know. She didn't ask if it was safe. She knew better. Steve looked at her. If we get a signal through, I have 1 contact still active. A traitor, old crew. He owes me. If he gets the ping and responds, we can ride a delivery crate out on a Nexan hauler. Linari's eyes stayed fixed on the path. And if the crate gets scanned? Then we're dead before we ever see the stars. No one said anything for a few seconds. Sarai's small voice broke the silence. What's a traitor? Steve crouched beside her. Someone who goes from one place to another and doesn't forget the people they leave behind. She blinked up at him. Like you. He smiled faintly, trying to be. They moved at midday, staying low through rust trenches and collapsed deck corridors. Steve led, scanning ahead with a makeshift thermal blank he'd rigged from his skiff's parts bin. Linari followed close, one arm wrapped around Sarai, the other gripping a scavenged metal shard she used like a blade. They passed 4 patrol check zones without being seen. Each time, Steve made them stop, wait silently behind corroded walls or under vent grates until the enforcers passed. The enforcers wore white polymer armor, shaped more for intimidation than function. Each of them bore the mark of the Cast Reclamation Syndicate on their shoulder plates. Linari froze the first time she saw it. "They're not colony guards," she said under her breath. Steve's face darkened. "They're private." She nodded once. "They found me. They won't take you," he said. "Not while I'm breathing." The words weren't romantic. They were factual, heavy, and Linari didn't question them. By hour 5, they reached the collapsed junction near Dock 14. The air was thinner here, and the lights flickered weakly overhead. The area had been shut down for years, which made it perfect for hidden gear, but also unpredictable. Steve knelt near a sealed conduit and pried open a metal lid. Dust poured out. Beneath it, wrapped in thermal mesh, was the uplink module. He powered it on. The screen buzzed. No signal. He cursed softly, checking the fuse. Linari crouched beside him, watching his hands move with speed and focus. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Power relays busted. I need 2 microcells or a heat source big enough to override the delay." She didn't hesitate. She peeled off her shimmer-wrapped shoulder tie, revealing a heat pack strapped to her skin, one of the small emergency types used for infant care. Thin, fading, but active. "Use it," she said. Steve looked at her. "You sure?" "I'd rather freeze here than never leave." He took it, fused it in. The unit buzzed again. This time it lit. The comm flashed green, signal locked. Steve typed fast, keying the encoded message and the pickup instructions to the rendezvous crate port. Then the signal cut. "Was it enough?" Linari asked. He stared at the unit. "If he's still listening, yeah." Behind them, Sarai tugged Linari's hand. "Mama," she whispered. "Someone's here." Steve turned. Too late. A voice echoed from the hall. Mechanical, filtered through a comm mask. Asset identified. Varellan female and subgenetic offspring. Human aiding and abetting. Orders, immediate retrieval. Linari pulled Sarai behind her. "Run." Steve didn't answer. He grabbed the module, slung it into his belt pouch, and pulled her by the arm. They sprinted, down the collapsed tunnel, through dripping coolant pipes and cracked support beams. Footsteps followed. 2, maybe 3 pursuers, fast, trained. Steve could hear their boots echo on metal, coordinated with military precision. They reached a sealed corridor. Steve slammed the door controls, but nothing happened. No power. Linari didn't hesitate. She shoved the child through a crack in the side vent, then wedged her arm against the door panel. Her breath was fast, shallow. Steve drew his cutter. Sparks flew as he jammed it into the override housing. 1, 2, 3 sparks. Then the panel flicked green. The door opened just enough. "Go," he shouted. They dove through. Behind them, shots rang out. Low-impact pulse bolts slamming into the wall. One grazed Steve's arm. He grunted, catching his balance as the door slammed shut behind him. Linari pulled Sarai close. The child was crying silently, tears streaking her dusted cheeks. Steve leaned back against the wall, panting. His arm was singed, but not bleeding. Linari looked at him. Her voice shook. "You're hurt. I've been worse." They didn't move again for several minutes. Then Linari leaned forward, voice barely audible. "If they catch us, they won't take her to a family. They'll put her into a fertility incubator, raise her until maturity, use her, sell her. I was in that system. I know what happens." Steve's stomach twisted. He looked at the child, so small, clinging to her mother's sleeve, watching him with wide, scared eyes. "We won't let that happen," he said. Linari leaned her forehead against his chest. "You didn't ask for any of this," she whispered. "I didn't," Steve said quietly. "But I'm not walking away." He wrapped his arm around her shoulder, holding her tight. In the dark, pressed together for warmth and safety, they waited. Outside, the retrieval teams searched. But inside, the 3 of them were still together. And Steve knew, with absolute clarity, that this was no longer a rescue. This was his family now. The wind outside Dock 14's dead sector had changed. It moaned through fractured vents and loose panels, kicking up fine, red dust like a warning. Every 5 minutes, a tremor ran through the foundation as the outer sand haulers shifted their cargo bays. The sound was distant, but constant, like heavy breaths from a dying machine. Steve had sealed the auxiliary corridor from the inside, buying them time. He knew it wouldn't last. The retrieval team would triangulate again. All it took was one drone pass, one leak heat signature, and they'd be surrounded. He checked the uplink. No reply yet. "Come on, Holland," he muttered under his breath. "You owe me." Linari sat against a cracked coolant drum, Sarai curled in her lap. The child had finally fallen asleep, but her breathing was shallow. Not sick, but depleted. Starvation didn't hit all at once. It crept in quietly, and Sarai was slipping. "She needs real food," Linari said quietly. "I know." She looked at him. "And warmth. Not your jacket. A medical blanket. Rehydration serum. Something more than scraped protein paste." He knew that too. "I could try the lower market tunnel," he said. "There's a med supplier who works under scrap cover. Might still be active." "You'll be seen," she said. "I'll go through the coolant gulch. It's harder to scan. Might buy us an hour." Linari didn't argue, but he saw it on her face, fear again. This time, not for herself. He crouched, placed his hand lightly on Sarai's head. "You stay hidden. Don't open the corridor until I knock 3 times, then 1. No more, no less." She nodded, watching him like someone memorizing a goodbye. He moved quickly through the service piping, every step calculated. Every shadow a potential death sentence. By the time he reached the tunnel vendor, he was soaked in sweat and blood had dried into the sleeve of his shirt where the grays had split open again. The vendor didn't look up, looking for something human. Med serum. Child grade. He'd sell if you have it. And food. Real food. The vendor raised one brow. "You sound desperate." "I am." A pause. "There's a bounty on a Varellan female and offspring. You know anything about that?" Steve froze, then looked the man dead in the eye. "No." The vendor stared back for a beat, then grinned. "Didn't think so." He handed over the supplies without another word. Steve paid with his last valid chip. No time to bargain. He turned to leave. Then something hit him from behind. Hard. His knees buckled. He hit the ground. Saw stars. 2 figures stepped out from the side curtain. One in a lightweight cloak, the other with a scanner in hand. "Asset proximity confirmed," said one. "Thermal trace matches Doc sector movement from flag sequence." "Bag him," the other said. "If he's with her, he'll lead us in." A bag went over his head. Hands tied fast behind his back. They dragged him out through the back corridor. Inside the service duct, Linari waited. Time passed in silence. Sarai stirred. "Mama, where's the man?" Linari pressed her hand gently to her daughter's head. "He'll come back." But she wasn't sure. Then, faintly, from the distance, 3 knocks. Pause. Then 1. She jumped to her feet. Moved fast. Opened the latch. And something was wrong. Steve stumbled through, barely on his feet. His lip was bloodied, and his left arm was burned. But he was alone. He slammed the hatch shut behind him. "They followed me," he said, gasping. "Not the patrol. Not government. Private extraction team. Hired." Linari caught him as he nearly collapsed. "How did you get away?" "Overloaded their scanner with a static loop. Hit one with a broken conduit pipe. Didn't kill them. Just bought seconds." He held up a small thermal beacon, flashing. "But they tagged me with this. We have maybe 30 minutes before they follow the trail." Her eyes widened. "Then we run now." "No," he said. "We can't outrun them. But we can mislead them." Linari stepped back, already calculating. "Ow!" He looked at the cargo hauler schedule. "There's a freight unit leaving in 24 minutes. No biometrics, just mass scan. If we get inside before the sweep, they won't see us. And if they scan afterward, then we'll be atoms." Silence. Linari wrapped Sarai tighter. Then said, simply, "We try." They moved fast. The freight hauler was already powered. Massive. Its belly cavity was half full of irradiated alloy scrap. The radiation levels were just under human threshold, but too dangerous for Varellans, unless shielded. Steve tore open a lead-line salvage box. "Get in. Both of you." Linari didn't argue. She pulled Sarai inside, cradling the child with both arms. Steve followed, slammed the crate shut behind them. Darkness closed in. Heat. Pressure. The hum of liftoff beginning. Minutes passed. Then movement. Lift. They were rising. Steve exhaled slowly. It worked, he whispered. But Linari was shaking. Steve, what is it? She looked down. Sarai wasn't moving. Her eyes were half closed. Her lips dry. Her breath shallow. She's not reacting, Linari said, voice breaking. She's too cold. Steve didn't hesitate. He unzipped his shirt, pulled the child against his bare chest, wrapped the jacket around them both. Then he pulled Linari close to, pressing them all together under the thermal layer. She'll be okay, he said, but he didn't know. They sat in that box as the ship groaned, rose, and carried them toward the clouds. They had escaped, but the price wasn't paid yet. The cargo hauler shook as it broke atmosphere. Inside the sealed crate, the air grew stale fast. The lead lining muffled sound, and the lack of pressure equalizers made Steve's ears throb. Every few seconds, he adjusted his breathing just to stay calm. Linari didn't speak. She was cradling Sarai, her face pale, sweat beading at her temples. The child was still too quiet, her breath barely fluttering against Steve's chest. The warmth from their bodies was helping, but not enough. She needed medical care. She needed oxygen support. She needed more than this. The hauler leveled out. They were in orbit now. Steve knew the trip wouldn't last long. These short-hop freights offloaded into the orbital trade array, where crates were resorted, scanned, and scheduled for outbound shipment. He checked the time on his battered wrist display. They had 12 minutes before the first automated scan cycle. He tapped the crate wall twice. Then again, a hatch above hissed open, manually triggered. The crate was designed with an override for cargo access, a trick smugglers used. Steve had paid for that crate with his last favor years ago. He pushed it open and helped Linari out, then Sarai. The freight bay was empty, lit by blue cargo lights. Gravity was low. Everything felt slightly off, like walking underwater. They were in the belly of the orbital node, a giant floating maze of metal and bureaucracy. Linari looked around. Where now? To Bay V7, Steve said. My contact is supposed to meet us there. If the ping got through. He led them down a narrow catwalk between stacked containers. Every few minutes, they ducked behind units as worker drones passed. The station had few humans on board, mostly auto staff and contracted bots. When they reached the maintenance corridor near V7, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Broad-shouldered, short hair, red vest with grease stains. Holland. Steve's heart jumped. You got the signal. Holland gave a slow nod. Barely. Had to reroute through 2 relays. You're not easy to track these days, Heartlawn. Steve gestured to Linari. We need passage. Immediate. She's castless. The child is hers. They're being hunted. Holland glanced at Linari, then at the girl in her arms. Looks like she's already dying. Steve's jaw tightened. That's why we don't have time. Holland sighed. I have a ship docked on the outer ring. Light freighter. No bioscanners. But I'll need bribe tokens to clear the external grid. I don't have tokens, Steve said. But I know you owe me. 5 years back. Sarni's ring. You remember. A pause. Then Holland cursed under his breath and nodded once. Fine. But you carry the risk. If they scan, we all burn. He turned to lead them, then froze. 3 more figures had stepped into the corridor from behind. Not patrol. Not station staff. Extraction contractors. Their body armor was matte black, marked with the sigil Steve had seen before. Reclamation Syndicate, private enforcement. 2 held stun rifles. 1 held a thermal net launcher. Linari immediately pressed back, shielding Sarai with her own body. The lead contractor stepped forward. Step away from the Varellan and the child. She is property of the Veltarnan Reproductive Lineage Foundation, declared absconded. You are charged with abduction. Steve stepped in front of Linari. She's not property. The contractor didn't blink. You're human. You don't get to decide that. Holland swore again and raised his hands. I'm not part of this. I'm out. He backed away. Steve clenched his fists. You scan her again. Tell me she's a damn object. The contractor raised his rifle. Then, a sharp whistle rang out. A mechanical hiss. A door behind the contractors burst open, and from it a drone, heavy, commercial, slammed into the side of the nearest enforcer. It wasn't built for combat, but its weight alone was enough to knock the man sideways. The others turned. Linari didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her elbow catching the second enforcer's rifle. It went off, hitting the wall. Sparks rained down. Steve grabbed the last one's thermal net launcher, twisting it as it fired. The net sprayed sideways, tangling in the rafters. Then silence. The corridor filled with smoke from the impact. Lights flickered. One enforcer groaned on the floor. The others were down, alive but out. Linari looked at Steve. Her hair was hanging wild, her shoulders heaving. "Did you know that drone would do that?" she asked. He blinked. "Nope." "Then let's go." They moved fast. Holland was already back at the dock. "That's all I'm doing," he said. "You're on your own now." The freighter ramp opened. Steve guided Linari up it, helping her carry Sarai. The child's eyes were barely open. Her pulse was still weak. Steve brought her into the med pod and activated the basic care system. It beeped twice, analyzing vitals. Then, status, critical, dehydration, oxygen depletion, hypoglycemia. He turned to Linari. "She'll recover. This system can stabilize her for now." Linari didn't respond. She was shaking. He stepped closer. She turned and pressed into him, her arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "I was ready to die on Tessari," she said. "I thought I was already dead." "You're not," he whispered, holding her. "You're here. You're alive. And she's going to be okay." Linari looked up, eyes wet. "You could have left me so many times." Steve brushed a hand along her cheek. "I didn't want to." She leaned forward and kissed him, gently but not uncertainly. No desperation, no shame, just warmth. Choice. When she pulled back, she whispered, "I want this. Not to pay, not to survive, but because I want you." Steve held her face, forehead to forehead. "I want you too." Outside the viewport, the stars burned. The ship detached from orbit. And for the first time since Tessari 9, the air around them felt clean. They were free, but only if they didn't look back. The stars stretched in silence as the freighter cruised beyond the orbital belt. The bulk of the ship groaned occasionally, but inside the main cabin, it was calm, warm, real. Steve stood at the NAV station, reading the coordinates for their destination, Trelver 3, a lightly colonized world with no caste restrictions, no syndicate jurisdiction, and most importantly, no records of Linari or Sarai. It wasn't paradise, but it was far from Tessar 9. He exhaled slowly. The door behind him slid open. Linari stepped in. She had cleaned herself up in the tiny wash station, her skin clearer now, the dullness of dehydration fading. Her long white hair was damp, pulled back with a strip of cloth from Steve's repair kit. She wore one of his shirts, loose, too wide at the shoulders but warm, and a pair of repurposed crew pants rolled up at the ankles. Her tall frame made the cramped room feel smaller, but she moved quietly, almost cautiously. "She's resting," she said. Steve turned to face her. "The pod regulated her glucose," she continued. "Her pulse is stable now. Breathing better. Colors coming back." He nodded, the weight in his chest finally easing. Linari stepped closer. She asked if the stars mean we're safe. Steve gave a small smile. "What did you say?" "I didn't know, but that the man holding her saved her life." He went quiet. He didn't know what to say to that. Linari stepped closer, resting one hand on his chest. "I meant what I said on the station. This isn't survival anymore. Not for me." He met her eyes. "I know. I want more." "So do I." A long pause stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Then she leaned in and kissed him again, this time deeper, slower, her hand curling behind his neck. Steve pulled her in, wrapping his arms around her back. There was no fear in her body now, only want, heat, trust. She pressed her forehead against his. "We made it off Tessari, Steve." "Yeah." "Then let me choose you." She pulled back slightly, her expression serious. "You held me like I was something fragile, but I'm not. I'm strong, and I want to give you everything. My body, my future, but on my terms. Not because I owe you, because I love you." Steve didn't move for a second. Then he nodded. Then let's build something real. They kissed again. This time, it led to more. They didn't rush. They undressed each other carefully, deliberately. Every movement was a conversation, silent but full of meaning. He traced the curve of her hips with reverence. She explored the angles of his chest, his arms, his scars. She climbed onto his lap, taller, heavier, but fully in control, and he let her lead. There was no shame, no past, just warmth and connection. The slow rhythm of shared breath, skin on skin, heat building not from desperation, but closeness. When they finally rested, tangled in the narrow bunk, her legs around his hand against the hollow of her spine, Steve kissed her temple and whispered, "You're not too much. You're everything." Linari didn't cry, but she closed her eyes and held him tighter. The ship continued its course. Days passed. They landed on Trelver 3 under an overcast sky, the air heavy with the scent of rain and soil. The settlement was small, modular homes, hydro fields, a medical post. No patrols, no surveillance, just people trying to live. Steve registered under a freelance mechanic's name. He used what little funds they had left to buy a 2-room shelter near the irrigation ridge. It had a working heater and a window that faced the cliffs. Linari planted their few belongings with care. She found new clothes. Sarai began speaking again, softly at first, then more often. She liked the rain. She called Steve Steve until she learned the full pronunciation. Then she started calling him my Steve. One morning, Steve stepped outside to find Linari kneeling in the soil, showing Sarai how to plant a sproutling. The child laughed when it wriggled in the dirt. Linari turned, her hair tied back, face flushed with life. Steve just stood there for a moment, watching them. Later that night, in the warmth of their shared bed, Linari whispered, "She needs a father." "You have one in mind?" he teased gently. She smiled against his shoulder. "You're already hers." And then, after a long pause, she added, "And I think I'm ready to try again. Not because someone told me to, but because I want to." Steve looked at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded slowly. "I want a child." He pulled her close. No words after that. Just quiet. Peace. They had come from death, dust, and rejection. But now, they had a home. Each other. And a future.